And welcome to Healing X Outreach. I'm your host, Augustine Estacio. Sorry about that. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. I was setting up a little late there, and I just want to apologize for that. Next week, we're going to have a retelecast show. It's going to actually be Keith Walker from Evidence Ministries being interviewed by Melissa Bramer, who does normally the every second and fourth Tuesday program. Keith Walker has been a guest speaker at the Witnesses Now for Jesus conference, which is held this year, October 6th through the 8th. And he's been a fantastic speaker there. He has a great YouTube ministry. Just look him up and Google Evidence Ministries. And Keith has evangelized to Mormons for years in Utah. So it's going to be a great interview for you to listen to. Those of you who don't listen on Tuesdays, you'll be able to hear it now on a Saturday, this program that probably hasn't been heard by the Saturday audience. So that's the purpose of having that program next Saturday with Keith Walker from Evidence Ministries. This week, though, we have Kylee Hickok, formerly of the 2x2s, also known as The Truth, but they like to be known as The Truth and Church of the Friends and Workers. And Kylee, if you are listening on air, just press 1 so that I can see you in the studio, unmute you for the purpose of the interview. And there she is. Okay, great. And so we're gonna go ahead and learn a lot about this particular group. We've learned a lot about. We've had a person from the Children. A good friend of mine, Dave Merrick, is from the Children of God, and he was in that particular group in the 70s. And we've had the Seventh-day Adventists, and so it's always good to learn about a new group and the traits of that group, and see the similarities that these groups have with one another. So, Kylee, give us a little bit of an understanding about the Church of the Friends and Workers. When did they originate? Was it a particular group of people, or was it a single person that was the first, I guess, the origin or founder of that particular group?
Hi, Augustine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you just perfectly.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for having me. So the origin, we'll call them the 2x2s during this interview. That's not what they call themselves, but the 2x2s actually was founded in 1897 by a man named William Irvine, but they don't talk about that. They claim that their church was established by Jesus on the shores of Galilee. And the average 2x2, my husband included, does not know about William Irvine, because they put forth the false narrative that Jesus started their church. Because all the other churches in the world, to them, are false religion because they were started by a man. They were headed up by a man. And so this true history of the 2x2s being started by William Irvine, that's bad to them. They don't want the average member to know that.
Wow. So, I mean, the average member doesn't, really thinks that they began in the first century by Jesus Christ. I know a lot of religious cults. They will say, of course, that they started in the first century by Jesus Christ and the apostles, but they have an understanding that their founder is a restorer of truth. That this is a restoration of truth. So,
Correct.
What does anybody think about that huge gap in history? Or think about their roots being traced throughout history all the way down to the apostles, or is it that they just they think that John's the last apostle that died, and then we began?
They really don't have answers about that. They can't answer that question, so they're very uncomfortable talking about it. However, there are William Irvine, and they claim that he was a restorer then. Then they'll go to that story, but they don't really like to go there because they can be proven wrong. So, but they'll say there's always been a remnant. One of the questions that makes them really uncomfortable is, well, how come there aren't any documents proving, before 1897? How come there's nothing dated prior to that? If you're started on the shores of Galilee by Jesus, wouldn't there be evidence prior to 1897? And there isn't, of course, but then you'll just get labeled a person with a bad spirit, or you have a questioning spirit. So I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Right.
Wow. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's usually the MO of
right.
religious culture.
That's right.
You're asking too many questions. Now, William Irvine, where does he hail from in the United States? We were to say where this group really sprang from, as far as Irvine's concerned. Go ahead.
It actually started in Ireland.
Okay.
Not exactly clear when they sent. So they called their ministers. William Irvine was the first worker, and that's the term they use for their ministry. And I can give you a little bit of his background. And if there's anybody, I did advertise this show on a couple of private internet discussion forums that are just for X2x2s. And if any of them are listening and they have better, if they can put in their 2 cents too by calling in, I don't know if people are allowed to call and talk, but I would love to be corrected on this. But what happened was he heard William Irvine encountered an evangelist from the group called the Faith Mission, which is still a relevant group today over in Ireland and Scotland. They're a Christian organization doing wonderful work over there, preaching the gospel. But their whole how they evangelize is they go out and they do tent missions, street preach, and when people convert to Jesus, when people come to saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, then they help them find a home church. So they are not a church in themselves. They are just evangelists. I shouldn't say just evangelists, but they're evangelists. So back in the late 1800s, William Irvine encountered one of their preachers, and he was inspired by how they went in faith. They don't advertise for donations. They rely on faith that God will provide. And he was inspired by that. And I think he started out with good intentions. So he joined the Faith Mission. He got partnered. They go out 2 and 2. He stole a lot of the Faith Mission's patterns and way of evangelizing. And when he started the 2x2s, he used their ideas in his own religion. So let me get back on track. It's kind of hard to do this not telling you how the 2x2s operate today. They believe they're the number 2 church because their ministry goes 2 by 2 as Jesus sent them off in Matthew on that mission, to go 2 and 2 and not take anything with you. So they claim that they're itinerant, they're celibate. There are men and women, and of course men get paired up with men and women get paired up with women, and they go to their, as they call it, their field, which is the area where they're going to stay and preach their gospel. They stay with members of the church. And back in the 1800s, when the Faith Mission did this, the workers would go, and they use that term workers, just like the 2x2s do today, because William Irvine stole that term from them, and have their mission in a community, and they preach the gospel. They pitch a tent, and they preach the gospel. And William Irvine did that. Then he joined their group and went out and did that. And when I first started learning, I was 20 years into the group before I really researched the history of it. I just believed everything I was told. When
So are the 2x2s, are they still in Europe? Are they still in Ireland?
Oh, yes.
Or
yes.
are they, how large are the 2x2s as a group? Do they keep a track of their numbers?
Not the average member wouldn't really know. I'm sure somebody kind of does. You could just make an educated guess. I wouldn't say it's a million. It's probably not a million, but I would say 500,000 worldwide is probably.
Oh, that's a good number.
A good guess.
That's a pretty good number.
It's worldwide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the worldwide. So so I guess they branched off to the United States eventually, and
they did.
And
that was in the early. I want to say like the 1940s, 30s, 40s.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So what distinguishes them, I guess, from mainstream Christianity? What is it that's unique about their particular group? I guess is it the structure? Is it both? Is it doctrine, or is it a little bit of both? And what specifically would you say is different from them? Because to let other people know that you're a mom, you have 3 children, and one of them serves as a Christian missionary now. So no doubt there's a little bit of freedom there that you have in the 2x2s that I guess like in that you wouldn't have in other groups. I know if that situation occurred within my home and I was a devout Jehovah's Witness, my wife was a devout Jehovah's Witness. I'm the one who became the Christian, but they would the organization that I was a part of would try to somehow break us up as a family, and would not like the fact that there are 2 faiths being taught in the same home. So there's certain freedoms there. But what distinguishes them from Christianity, and is there any particular thing that makes them, I guess, more of a hold on its members as opposed to the typical church someone would walk into?
Okay. What distinguishes them from Christianity is the identity of Jesus, who Jesus is, and how we're saved. When I was first allowing myself to question the core beliefs of the 2x2s, I began to learn what real Christian doctrine was, what Orthodox Christianity is, and the essentials and the non-essentials. So on the essentials of Christianity, who Jesus is, that he is God in the flesh, and how we are saved by grace through faith, through the work of Jesus Christ, those are the main 2. They're the 2x2. So they're not a unique cult when you consider those doctrines. Every cult has those doctrines in common, right? But how they're unique, even from the cults, is that they do not have buildings. They think buildings are a mark of a false religion and a false teacher. They meet in homes. The church is in the home. They see that description in Scripture of a church being in the home. They see that as a prescription for all time for a true church, and not a description of how church could be done. And that their ministry is the celibate ministry. You commit to it for life, and although many of them don't make it that long, but when you offer to become a worker in the 2x2s, it's understood that you are making a lifetime commitment to be celibate, and you are itinerant ministry, meaning you live out of a suitcase and you travel and you stay with the followers of the group. You stay in their homes.
Wow, so that's got to be kind of hard then. So they no doubt must make a decision as to I mean, that's kind of hard. It's a very loose organization if you meet in other people's homes. I know that's actually quite biblical because one of the arguments as a former Jehovah's Witness that we make with the Jehovah's Witnesses is that when it speaks of going from house to house, we argue, of course, those that are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, is that the reason why they're going house to house is they're not going to the houses of strangers. They're actually going to the houses of believers, and each house is where the believers meet. You know, these are the homes of believers where they would gather, you know, as opposed
Correct.
to, I guess, the synagogues. You know, so the believers are actually gathering in their homes. So that's actually a good biblical model if you're under persecution, you know, because then the authorities never know where your group is because you could be at any number of people's houses. And so
exactly.
That's how the first century believers survived, actually. So
sure.
But,
and going house to house, model, there's nothing wrong with that. But the 2x2s claim that it's, well, first of all, they don't evangelize house to house. They don't do that. They don't. Sometimes they will go knocking on doors and hand out invitations to. So, like the churches in the home, they have the structure is they have a Sunday morning meeting that's for members only, and the elders are the ones who have the homes where the churches are. So where I live, in the city I live, there's probably 7 homes that have a Sunday morning meeting, and that's where they don't like to use the word worship, but that's where they gather on Sunday morning. Everybody's assigned a home to go to on Sunday morning, and they'll sing a hymn, and then each person has a chance to say a little prayer, and then each person stands up and bears a testimony. And then they do communion. They don't call it communion really. They call it the emblems, the bread and the wine. And then they'll sing another hymn, and then everybody's dismissed. That's the Sunday morning model. Now, they have also what's called gospel meetings, where the workers in that area will rent a hall or a school. They'll have a public place where they will have their meeting where they preach their gospel.
Wow.
But the workers aren't really active in going out and inviting people to come to that. They mostly rely on the body of their existing believers to invite people. But that doesn't happen very often. So the majority of the group is made up of people who are born into it. There's not a lot of outside converts.
Right. But you were converted into it, though.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've been able to survive somehow. I mean, what's their attempt for? I mean, if they're the 2x2s, they have to reach out to people. Is they reaching out simply an invitation to come to their houses? But you said that maybe the invitation is just to the gospel meetings that they may have. And how often do they do that? So now I know. I've also been. The Jehovah's Witnesses came from a group called the Bible Students, and the Bible students generally, even today, they will meet in their homes, which will be the home of an elder. And so these are all very, very similar. These are all very similar things, and sometimes what happens is the Bible students might meet in a Masonic hall because they will rent Masonic halls, or they will rent maybe, some kind of building. But generally, they do rent Masonic halls from Freemasons so that they can meet there. And so, I mean, for the little while that I became a Bible student, I would meet in somebody's home, and when we would have also conventions, and conventions would be where several groups of a congregation which met in somebody's home would get together, and we would probably rent a hotel conference room. And so that, the Bible students are not, they also don't keep a track of numbers, but they are also worldwide, and they're not as large as Jehovah's Witnesses, but they are, I think it's estimated maybe 100 or 200,000 worldwide Bible students. So, it's just harder, I guess, to keep a track of a group that meets in homes as far as numbers is concerned. But it's happening in several groups. You were converted, but I guess they generally still flourish by just simply having families and whatnot. Is that the case?
That's the case, and how I was brought into it is also not uncommon. I was in high school and was dating a boy that was raised in it, and he was kind of breaking the rules. You're not really supposed to go outside the group to date,
right?
But he did, and he was a little bit of a rebel, and I was actually in a healthy Christian church. I was a new Christian. I was a baby Christian. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. So I didn't really have tools and knowledge to examine how the group could be the 2x2s when I was going to their meetings because my boyfriend invited me. I didn't know how to discern the truth from what they were, to examine what they were saying.
Are your parents and your family from an evangelical background?
No.
No, they're not?
No. In fact, on my mom's side of the family, my grandmother on my mom's side of the family was a Jack Mormon, and I didn't know that really until the last 5 years. Yeah. So my mom's side of the family going back is Mormon, and my dad's side of the family is Southern Baptist. But my mom or my dad didn't practice anything, and it wasn't a Christian home. We just didn't talk about it. They believed in a God, but they just didn't talk about it. And I have big stories actually growing up of Mormon missionaries coming to the house and being invited in and talking to my mom because they would have known her background. And I remember them now. I was like, oh, those were Mormons when I was thinking about that a couple of years ago. That's who they were. I have this memory of them coming in and with a guitar and wanting to study with my mom. But they only came a couple of times.
That's amazing. So I guess, wow. So, there are a lot of parents that are like that. They may have come from a religious background but are, quote unquote, not really religious. So
right. And I think there's a story from my grandmother's side that I just don't know. There's a reason she didn't embrace Mormonism, and I don't know why. She's passed away now, so I can't ask her.
Right. But that's amazing. So you came from a Mormon and a Southern Baptist background, and so they never impressed any of that upon you. It's truly divine providence that you became a Christian at all. It's a miracle.
It really is. It is a miracle. How it happened. So I met my husband in the 2x2s, and a few years later, we're looking at schools for our son. I homeschooled him for kindergarten. A really good friend of mine who was also in the 2x2s had her son in a neighborhood Christian school. And that was really frowned upon, to put your kid in a Christian school, because to the 2x2s, just like the Mormons believe and just like the Jehovah's Witnesses believe, any cult, people who are claim to be Christians or anybody outside their group is of the devil. That's right. False teachers, and you do not associate with them. Well, I was looking at the school, and I couldn't see anything wrong with it, and I did concede that, okay, well, they're going to teach him Bible principles, but when I was having the argument with my husband about sending our son to the school, I said, well, we'll teach him. When he brings home something that we know is wrong, we'll watch the Bible curriculum, and when we see it's wrong, we'll teach him what's true. We'll tell him why it's wrong. And my husband was absolutely not, we're not doing this. Well, I went against his wishes, disobeyed my husband, and I enrolled our son in the school. And it was the biggest fight my husband and I had ever had. And it took years, but that's where I began to see that what I was being taught in the cult was a lie. And the biggest one right away that impressed me was the cult teaches that people who claim to be Christian but aren't in their group aren't honest people. Because if they were honestly seeking God and wanting to be a true Christian, God would lead them to our group. They would be a part of our group. And I was watching Christians live out an authentic, selfless Christian life. I watched pastors' families who sent their kids to this Christian school who were, that's another lie, is that pastors and preachers of other churches are just in it for the money. They're all the same. They're just doing it to get rich, like a Jimmy Swaggart or a Jim Baker, or Joe Osteen. Well, I was
that almighty broad brush.
Yes, exactly. And I was seeing these families whose, the dad was a pastor, and he's driving a 30-year-old car, and his wife is shopping at the secondhand stores, and they're pouring out their lives for the sake of the gospel. So I began to see that the narrative that the 2x2s taught me was a lie, and I should have known that. It's just so subtle, because I was part of a healthy that had a good pastor. They weren't deceiving people, and
so was this?
As you get entrenched in the group, it just takes time and years for the thought reform to happen. And
so
pretty soon I began.
So was the biggest fight that you had with your husband about the Christian school? It winded up that the Christian school was it that avenue that really gave you seeds of doubt, because now you were actually seeing Christians on a regular basis and seeing their lives and getting to know people, even though you're just dropping the kids.
Right. That was the first scale to fall off my eyes.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great. That really that gives hope. That gives hope for churches that do like vacation Bible schools and do have, in their churches when they set up a Christian school or a school, a place where people can take their kids outside of public school to learn curriculum. It really shows that churches delving into that area is not it's an area where you can also evangelize to people without actually being in your face, so to speak, evangelism. And that's a great witness because my wife, she works at a Southern Baptist church. She's an administrator there for the pastor there, and they had a school for a while, and then they closed the school. But you're a good testimony for why churches should open up schools at their churches, and because they're planting seeds, without them knowing it, without even them knowing it. So that's fantastic. So that was your first, I guess, you got to see. And actually, for my wife, that was a big point, is seeing a Christian that was belying what our group said about Christians, that they're a bunch of hypocrites, that they don't really live out their faith. They don't really care about God like we care about God. That's just they're living two lives. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, I'll never forget, we have this image in a book called You Can Live Forever in a Paradise Earth of Christians. And it's a Christian couple sitting in a pew in a church, all reverently listening, paying attention together. and then in the next picture they're at home and they are going at each other's throat. And that's what we typify Christians as being, and that might be the case for a great portion of all of us Christians. You know, we don't always have our best, you know, when we go home, and we might be at each other's throats or whatever, or, you know, other various ways that in our Christian lives that we fail, and I think that's what the religious cults they try to jump all over the fact that people do fail in their walk, and they're human, and it's a struggle. But it's a struggle because we're still fighting every day with the Holy Spirit to look like perfection, which is Jesus Christ. The Holy Spirit's
right.
working with imperfect, you know, clay to make us look like Jesus. And so, yeah, we have our failings, but that doesn't mean that we're hypocrites or we're bad Christians. It just means that we're a work in progress, and I think that's what those groups try to say, that that's evidence that we're just not as holy as they are. So that's
right.
awesome.
And they through their own effort project this image of holiness and perfection, like the Pharisees. The outside looks so good. You know, why is it that? Is it, you know, in Utah, the Mecca of Mormonism, and a person who really doesn't know the difference between Christianity and Mormonism would say, you know, Mormons, they're your best neighbors, they're your best employees, but there's also the other side, you know, yeah, they'll say that, like that image you said you saw in the book, that the Jehovah's Witnesses painted of Christians, that on Sunday they look great, but when they go home, they're ripping each other's throats out. Well,
right.
cults put under the rug. And my example is that Utah is like the biggest consumer of internet pornography in the nation.
Wow, I did not know that.
Or one of the biggest. I haven't looked up the statistic in a couple of years, but it's up there.
I do know that.
And antidepressants.
I do know that in Salt Lake City, in Utah, the Mecca of Mormonism, that they do have a serious problem with the youth, and that there is a serious crime problem with the youth there in Salt Lake City. So,
and I don't mean to point fingers. It's just that what they claim about Christians is happening in their own, you know, in their own backyard. It's in their own religion. They're just better at covering it up. I think that was one thing that impressed me when I left the 2x2s and got into a healthy church as an adult and really examined how things were handled. And things are handled in the light. Nothing was hidden from the church body. There's open communication. And I'm not saying that's true with every church. Like you said, we're not perfect. But when and it's done biblically, it's done in the light. And I loved how open our pastor, the pastor at the church I go to now, is about social issues. And one time we had this conference about pornography. And he wasn't embarrassed to say, I have all the filters on my computers. You know, they just talk about things. It's in the open, and so there's no shame in talking about these things. Now, in the 2x2s, it's a shameful thing. You don't talk about sin. You don't confess your sin to one another and pray for one another, because that might disrupt the image.
Right. Their image
that they're God's perfect purple. I understand that the Jehovah's Witnesses have this saying. I think the Mormons have this saying too. Well, the church, the people aren't perfect, but the church is.
Yes. Yeah. And it's putting lipstick on a pig.
And we are all pigs. We are all pigs.
Yes, we are all little piggies. It's true. They want to dress themselves up. They're so image conscious that they don't want to deal with the obvious. The fact is that we are imperfect people, and God works on us individually. And some of us do better, and some of us do worse. But it's the effort. You know, the sanctification is what I always say. I call it a process of progress.
Right.
And so that means
and that was something I didn't even know what that word meant when I came out of the two bites. I didn't know what justification and sanctification meant.
Yes.
And so the 2x2s, image is really important. They have, they're works-based religion, and so the works that save you are getting to every meeting, and the women especially have to abide by a certain code of aesthetics, if you will. The rules have loosened, especially in the last 10 years, but when I became a Christian, 2x2s, the women do not wear, they all wear skirts, and we were taught from the workers that if the activity required you to wear pants, then the activity wasn't necessary. Makeup was a no-no. Cutting your hair was a no-no. Even putting highlights in your hair. And the workers stand in people's way, people who are genuinely honest, thinking they're doing the right thing and want to be baptized. They have to be vetted first, make sure they're following all the rules. And, most of the people who get denied baptism are if the workers found out you've, like if a man has smoked, or if they can see that you have bangs, you're a woman and you have bangs, or maybe you wear mascara, or you have highlights in your hair, they'll deny it. So they are the mediators, and not Jesus. They get to decide who's. Well, it's interesting because they believe you have to be. Well, I don't know if they all believe this. My husband believes you have to be baptized to be saved, and but the workers are the ones who get to decide who's baptized or not. So with my husband's theology, the workers hold the keys to heaven.
Wow. So
I don't know if they all believe that.
Not for baptism.
I don't know if they all believe that, but
they have to do a vote. Do they have to vote whether you're worthy to be baptized?
It's not really that organized. They hold baptisms at their yearly conventions, and each state has conventions. So where I live, there's 2 conventions a year in 2 different parts of the state, and that's when they give the opportunity for baptism. And they'll announce it and say, if you're thinking about taking the step of baptism, then go to the worker you know best and talk to them about it. And so then that worker judges whether or not you're worthy to be baptized, because they've been the worker that knows you best is the one that's going to have been in your home, has observed you, how you live, and so then they'll decide if you're worthy to be baptized or not.
Yeah, that's exactly how Jehovah's Witnesses do. They do baptisms only at their conventions, and with the exception, of course, that you have to pass like an interview of so many questions. I think it's now 100. No, I think it's 80 questions. It was 120.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was 120 questions at one time. Now it's 80. And then the elder has to go through the questions, and then he makes a decision, based upon, I guess, your understanding of the faith, because that's what it is. It's just a form of catechizing people into the faith. And
the only understanding the 2x2s. Sorry, the only understanding the 2x2s want you to have is that their ministry is the only true ministry on the church. On the earth. If you believe that their ministry is the only true ministry, and as a woman you haven't cut your hair or dyed your hair or wear makeup, or they haven't caught you in pants at the mall or seen you darting in to see a movie, then then they'll approve you for baptism.
Yeah, and the thing is that I did want to ask you about the dress code because I was looking at photos, and it does seem like they have a particular style of dress. Every group has their way of dressing, which you can, like, I can spot Jehovah's Witnesses in a crowd, because especially when they're wearing their ministry attire. Well, you guys call it the field. We call it field ministry, and you can tell Jehovah's Witnesses. You can tell Mormons from Jehovah's Witnesses. They have a particular look about them.
Sure.
And just like you could also tell, like if I see Anabaptists, we have an Anabaptist church not far from where I live. You just know they're Anabaptists. Anabaptists kind of look like some Mennonites, and Mennonites also dress like Anabaptists, and also Quakers. They all kind of dress in the old colonial look. And
my aunt, when I joined the 2x2, my aunt thought I was becoming a Quaker. So that's funny.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. They look like a mix between Anabaptist and but not quite that old, but yet like a more modern Anabaptist group. The way they dress.
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it. Yeah, and like I said, over the last 10 years, especially they say they don't have any rules. They say everybody's convicted by the Holy Spirit, of course. But when you're in a group and there's pressure, and you've got to, if you're not going to be able to be baptized and to keep looking like the good follower of the group, you need to be baptized, because to be baptized, they don't allow you to take part in communion unless you're baptized. So, but the rules have relaxed. So nowadays, you might see people out and about around town, and the women might be wearing trendier clothing, pants, and have their hair down. But on Sunday morning, their hair is up in a bun, and they're wearing a skirt or a dress.
Yeah.
And there are women who push that boundary, definitely.
Right.
But the workers aren't. I don't think it's as common nowadays to confront people about it the way they used to, and I think it's because their numbers are dwindling, and there have been so many people leave since the internet came to be, and that I think they don't want to have the fight and push people out. They want people to stay in, so they're being more careful about it.
Have they modernized? Have they decided to use the internet for evangelism, like the Jehovah's Witnesses now have finally bought in?
No way.
The internet used to be completely demonized, and now they've gone the exact opposite. They have so bought in that they push their website like it is the Grand Poobah website.
Yeah, no, they don't have a website. No.
Yeah.
That's too worldly. But they all have computers. And one of the big rules was, and it's a huge deal, is you don't have a TV. That's too worldly. You do not have a television. And so people would get them and hide them in their closets, and then when the workers would have their turn to stay at their house, they'd hide them in a closet. But nowadays it's still taboo to have a TV, but they all have laptop computers. And the last time right before I left meetings, we had workers staying at our house, and they're both in my living room on their laptops, and one of them was watching an NBA basketball game on the laptop, and I just watched that and laughed because they would be horrified if I had a television in my living room, and I did have a big screen TV. I thought about rolling it out and saying, I win. It's just so, and so they live a double life. My husband is still a devoted member, and he's an elder. The meeting is no longer. It used to be in our home, and when I left the 2x2s, I requested that the meeting be taken out of our home. And so it was moved to somebody else's home, but my husband is still the elder.
Okay. Okay, wow.
That. But he he lives a double life. He comes home and breaks all the church rules. But on Sunday, he walks. He talks the talk on Sunday, and he appears to walk the walk, but he doesn't.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, having having you at home has been a bad influence.
Yeah.
And also the excuse. That's the benefit. Also, you're also the excuse. So.
Right.
But that's a good thing that you could possibly have a good influence on him, and also a bad influence at the same time. They would think it a bad influence, or both. We have a caller on here who has pressed 1. Just want to let callers know if you have some questions, just the number is 347-934-0379, and just press 1 if you have any comments or questions for Kylee. 403, you're on the air. If I'm not correct, this is probably Brian.
Hi there. Hi, good morning. Hi, thanks, Gus. Hello, Kylee.
Hi.
Hi there. Say, I was just looking at the site here, the Blog Talk site. I don't know if all the pictures is that the picture of you there with the little black circles in the background? Is that you?
Yes.
Jennifer Aniston lookalike. Holy mackerel.
Oh my gosh.
You know what?
Post fun.
I wanted to just ask you a couple questions. I'm so fascinated by, always have been, from when I first became a JW 40 years ago. I'm no longer one now, but at the time, I bought a small book called a little book, probably 200 pages, called The Small Sects in America. Mm-hmm. And one of them was 2x2s.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of a write-up in there. And so I've always been kind of fascinated. See, when I became a witness, they had introduced this idea to me that there is a one-true church, and it would have to be one of the smaller or mid-sized Protestant churches. Probably had to be the truth. And it's interesting, I don't know if you know, but it's very, very common in JW circles. We just always referred to ourselves as the truth.
Correct. And I was aware of that. Yeah.
I think that's similar with the 2x2s. Now, I'll tell you a little. I'll tell you a little, just a little anecdote, and then I got a couple questions for you.
Okay.
Years and years ago, one day I was in a drugstore. At the time, I was active, somewhat prominent member of the JWs, and it was at Christmas time. And the woman in front of me was doing her transaction with the clerk and wished the clerk Merry Christmas. And the young lady smiled and said, "Oh, thank you. I don't celebrate Christmas, but thank you." And then there was a little bit of a awkward moment for a minute, and then I kind of stepped in and said, "Well, yeah, I don't either," because at the time I was a witness, and it just kind of broke the ice for a minute, and everybody smiled, and then the woman walked off, and then I did my transaction. But I knew that the young woman was not a Jehovah's Witness, because in the area where I lived, I knew everybody in what we called a circuit. We would have twice a year what we called circuit assemblies, and then in the summertime a district assembly. But anyway, I knew that this girl wasn't a witness. I thought she was a Christadelphian at the time. However, years later, probably about 20 years later, 15 to 20 years later, I actually ended up hiring this girl's father at my business. Oh. And in the course of getting to know him a little bit, I found out that years before, his daughter, who was now living in California, had been a clerk at this particular drugstore. And then I realized, because At
Wow.
least in this area, the 2x2s do not celebrate Christmas. Is that universal around the world?
No, it's not universal.
Oh, okay. Well, the ones in this area...
a lot of them don't, but some do. And it all depends on, like it's kind of geographical. And it also kind of depends on what workers are in the area. And so some people, if they know that particular worker frowns on Christmas traditions, a Christmas tree, or then people will kind of downplay it a little bit and not do it as much. But if it's a more liberal worker, then they'll have more fun with it. But mostly what they do, that's loosened over the last probably 50 years. When my husband was raised in this, when he was a little boy, absolutely not. He was raised in the Midwest. You did not do anything, and then that kind of relaxed to, well, we'll have dinner together as a family, and then maybe exchange a few presents. But
okay.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on where you live and who the leadership is.
Okay, that's interesting. That's something I learned. I thought it was probably more universal, but at any rate, that was the case here. I live in Alberta Province, Western Canada, just north of the U.S. borders where I live. Mm-hmm. There are quite a lot of 2x2s in this area. I had heard from our congregation overseer's wife back, this would probably be in the early 80s. She was raised on a farm near here, and in the 40s and 50s. In fact, I think some of the 2x2s were in Canada during the Second World War. There were what you might call labor camps for conscientious objectors, and most of the male witnesses at that time were rounded up in Canada. Not all of them, but especially if they were what we call pioneer witnesses who go door to door all day long, every day. Those people were rounded up and they had to serve in labor camps during the war because the witnesses were banned during the Second World War in Canada. And I think the 2x2s were as well. In fact, they did try to get come up with a bit of a name. I think they called themselves the Christian Convention or something like that for purposes of getting conscientious objector status during the Second World War. But some of them ended up in these labor camp or these work camps as well. It wasn't harsh treatment or anything. It's just they were young men of military age, and to be on the safe side, the government took people like witnesses, I think even Mennonites and so on, and these young guys were up maybe cutting trees and getting lumber and stuff in the mountains and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they knew about these 2x2s, and this woman I was telling you about, she had, in the farming areas in Alberta at least, there's a lot of these, there seems to be a lot of them are rural people. But in the city I live, they have some meetings, and this guy that I knew, he eventually, he opened up. They seem to be quite secretive. They don't want other people to even really know who they are. The impression I got was that was a bulwark or a cautionary thing in case persecution came, that they didn't know who the members of the true church were so that they could protect themselves. I think that's part of their folklore, is it not?
It could be in the early days. They do like to still operate under the radar, but I think it's for different reasons currently. I think it's because they are so ill-equipped to defend their faith and to know. They don't even agree on their doctrines from region to region. You'll go to one part of the United States where divorce and remarriage is okay. You go to another part of the United States, you can't participate. You can come to the meeting. You have to sit there and be quiet first.
Right. Okay, now just another quick thing. I don't want to...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to take up all the time in case somebody else has a question, but One thing I did want to mention was how similar the doctrines of the 2x2s were and are to the JWs. I mentioned the similarity about Christmas, but they don't believe. They believe, similar to the witnesses, that Christ is only the Son of God, not God the Son.
Correct.
I believe, and some of this business of evangelizing and having the one true church. I had heard that they even, it's been 10 years or so since I did all my lot of reading on the internet about them, but I had heard that they even had sort of pointed forward to the year 1914 area as being when the end of the world would come, or that the Gentile times were going to end at that time. Do you have any knowledge of that?
Gosh, not off the top of my head. I don't remember. No, the son of William Irvine, he had some pretty wacky. He went kind of wacky, and he was excommunicated. And that would have been a belief that he had. But as today, no, obviously not. But I was a convert. I converted in 1987, and like they don't talk about their history.
Right. So you can really.
Like that. So I'm sorry, I really can't answer that question well for you.
Okay. Now, just one other quick thing about just a little bit about how you view everything now. I'm always curious when people convert from one religion to another. There's a great psychological leap, great psychological effort that must be put into that as you completely abandon what you maybe formerly believed. I know in my case, when I left the witnesses, it was extremely, it was catastrophic in the sense of how hard I had to fight to make over my own mind, but also what it did to my family. It just about destroyed my marriage.
Right.
And I'm wondering in your case, I'm just wondering in your case, you mentioned how your husband seems to be very strong still in the church. Now, he was raised as a 2x2, was he?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
He was third generation.
Okay. So pretty hard for him. His extended family are all quote unquote in the truth,
yep.
and hard for him to. Now, how do his parents treat you now that you've left? Was there any shunning?
Well, his parents had both passed away before I left. But yes, he comes from a large family. He has he's the youngest of 8 kids, and there are 2 sisters who aren't in it. One will still defend it, and the other one, I can talk freely and openly with her. She knows the history. She's not really Christian. She's on the fence. But I shouldn't say not really Christian. She's not a Christian, but she's on the fence, and she's open to talk about things. The other sister still believes it's the only true church, but she just doesn't have the willpower to abide by its standards and rules to live in it.
Right. My experience.
So yes, there has been shunning.
Okay.
Even from my own husband. Yeah.
Oh, okay. From your own husband to you?
Oh yes.
Oh really? Well, but you guys still live together.
Yes, we're still married. We live more as roommates. We're polite, but I'm not included in like if he gets invited to go have dinner with some of them or go to a potluck, I'm not included in that, and I'm not worthy anymore to read the Bible with or pray with or have any type of discussion about spiritual matters with. I'm not worthy of that anymore.
Okay, very similar to what would happen in a divided JW home.
Right. Real quick, if I can just this really has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now, but the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, William Irvine, the founder of the 2x2s, and Joseph Smith of Mormonism all have something in common. They were all Freemasons. Isn't that interesting?
They were all what?
Freemasons, high up in Masonry, in Freemasonry.
Well,
and,
you know,
and I wonder.
Bible students
I'm sorry?
would dispute that. The Bible students would say that while Charles Russell fraternized with Freemasons, there's no concrete evidence he was. But for me, I think that if it looks like a lemon and smells like a lemon, it's not apple pie. So,
so I think it's just kind of the secret. Mormonism more so, has their secret rituals that they do in the temple that are very much like Mason rituals.
Yeah.
But I wonder sometimes if the secrecy, the exclusivity, if the root of it comes from Freemasonry, and that those three religious leaders had that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting commonality.
It is. Just one other quick thing, Kylee. So how are you and your husband dealing with the spiritual education of your children? Or I'm not sure how old they are, but what's happened there as far as you being able to teach them your views, and him? Are the children forced to go to his church, or how's that?
No,
what's happening
actually,
there?
the 2x2s are pretty passive when it comes to this, and I've kind of found it a little bit amusing, even that he believes his children are now lost eternally, that they've lost their salvation or any hope of salvation, but he's not willing to fight for it. It's because they are so ill-equipped to defend their faith and to articulate their faith. Really, the whole thing with the 2x2s is it has to come by special revelation. And so no, I have complete power in that, and he doesn't fight it. I have a 23-year-old son who he's the one that started in that Christian school. He started there in first grade, went through the 12th grade, went on missions trips in high school. He became a Christian in junior high, and that's kind of how the house of cards started to fall down. He started going to a youth group at the church that I attend now, and that youth group teacher was so good. It wasn't just all, playing games and fluffy stuff. Youth group. He was very good at teaching doctrine and the differences between the cult and Christianity, and he did it in a really fun, engaging, interesting way for the kids. And my son saw, and of course the Bible teacher at their Christian school, the high school Bible teachers were excellent in that area too. And when my son, I think he was a sophomore, when he had to do, he was taking a class called Cults and World Religions, and he had to do a project, and he chose Mormonism. And I hadn't left the 2x2s yet, but I saw the similarities between Mormons and the 2x2s, and that really kind of gave me the courage to get on Google and start looking stuff up. But no, I have full control, and my middle daughter, she's 20 years old, and she's a student at Corbin University, which is a small private Christian college in Salem, Oregon. She's the one that's been on multiple missions trips to Russia, and she's studying ministry. She wants to be a missionary and a counselor, a Christian counselor. And then I have a 16-year-old who's a sophomore in high school. And my husband is very, very hands-off with them spiritually, and really he always has been. Their idea of teaching their children about the Bible is just to get them to every meeting. He would never lead Bible studies with the family the only time we'd read together as a family is if a worker was visiting us and they'd want to read a chapter together. And that doesn't even really, they don't really study the Bible. They just obey what the workers say. And the workers don't even really study the Bible. They get it, how they prepare for preaching their gospel is they'll maybe get an idea in their head, or they'll read an inspirational quote or something out of a book, and then they will find that ideal and
right.
talk about it for half an hour. It's more of a motivational speech than really empty.
I've always been tempted to try and get to one of their meetings just to see. The Sunday morning meeting, then, how long does it last? The way you described it, it didn't sound like there was much instruction on Bible doctrine. It sounded like it was more of a testimonial type meeting. How long do these meetings last?
They're an hour. Yeah, typically an hour. Sometimes they can run over that, but they try to keep it within an hour. And no, there is no Bible teaching. There is no knowing the context of certain scriptures and why. Like, for instance, with the rule about women's hair, they get that out of that verse in Corinthians that say a woman's hair is her glory. Well, why did Paul write that to the Corinthians, but we don't see it in any other book in the Bible? He didn't tell the Philippians women to not cut their hair. He didn't tell the Ephesian women, So they don't ask these questions. They don't research. They see something and they think that's a good rule and they apply it. And if you ask questions or you go against it, then you have a bad spirit. And that's how they keep the members in, is through fear, as you both well know.
One other really quick thing, I'm always curious how people in the other sects viewed Jehovah's Witnesses when they were in that sect, because the witnesses, to their credit or discredit, at least they put their money where their mouth is and go door to door. And I've always wondered how people in some of the more extreme sects, I've asked this of Mormons, whenever Gus has various guests, I like to ask them this question. What did you think of Jehovah's Witnesses when they would come and to your door and try and evangelize you? How did you deal with them?
I would just say, oh, no, thank you. I know the truth. And again, I wasn't equipped to engage them in any way, shape, or form. But what I thought about the group as a whole, or Mormons as a whole, is I didn't know the differences between any of them. It didn't matter to me at the time. I thought I just labeled them in the same basket with Catholics, with Baptists, with any other religion.
Okay. Well, hey,
I didn't really
Kylee,
begin to learn about them until I left the 2x2s, and of course I did all the research on the 2x2s, and then and part of that research was visiting websites that explained what cults were. One website that was really, really helpful to me was Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, CARM, C-A-R-M. Matt is his name, the man that runs that website. Just outstanding. And I spent a lot of time on that website. And that's where I began to learn the differences between the different cults and their doctrines and how they differed from Orthodox Christianity.
Right. What type of church do you attend now?
Now I attend a small non-denominational Bible church. And It's been a tremendous, it's been a great place for me to heal. It's kind of a traditional church. It's not super contemporary, but I was amazed at how open they were to my questions, and never, as you guys probably experienced in the Jehovah's Witnesses, if you ask questions about certain rules or doctrines, you get chastised for that. And there was never, and it's in a passive-aggressive way is how I would experience, like you'd be asking, well, why would you want to know that? Now, have you thought about why you're asking that question? Could you maybe have a bad spirit? They don't. And
yes,
at our little church, it is ask us anything, and I asked some hard questions, and was never felt like I was doing something wrong for asking. Not once.
Right. Now, you were in for how many years? Were you in the 2x2s? How many years was it together?
I about 20, a little over 20 years. I was 16 when I first started attending the meetings. I think I was 17 when I finally made they call it making your choice or professing to join the group. And I left I was 41.
And you left what year? Long ago? How long ago?
Pardon?
How long
I was 41.
ago
I left in 2001.
2001.
Or sorry, 2011. Sorry, 2011. Sorry.
2011. You've been out for 6 years or so.
Yeah. It'll be 7 years, I think, in February. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's hard
Thanks,
for me to.
Kylee.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Really, really happy that you're able to do that. I feel a bit sorry almost for your husband. He's probably a very lonely man right now, and maybe, hopefully, someday you'll be able to convince him of leaving as well. I hope things go
only
well
the Lord,
for you.
only the Lord can do that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate your questions.
So you touched a little bit on there. So it was through one of your children studying on Mormonism in the Christian school that was one of the moments which got you to investigate your own religion.
That was a pivotal. It was pivotal. Yeah. Yeah. It took a while. It took years. Like I said, my son started in that school in first grade, and part of the tactics, as I'm sure you well know, that the church uses is to make you feel guilty for questioning anything they say or do. Right. And so the pattern would go like this. I'd see a red flag. Okay, let's say early on the red flags were, well, why do women have to do, not cut their hair? Why can't I have a cute haircut? Why can't I wear makeup? And so these questions pop up in my mind, and then you immediately beat yourself up for it. And they subtly train you over years of attending their meetings through their passive-aggressive messages that, so I would immediately say, oh, Kylee, you can't think like that. You have a bad spirit, and this cannot lead anywhere good. And if you have a bad spirit, you could lose your salvation. So you just need to stop this. And it's called thought stopping, actually. Stephen Hassan, in his book about cults and thought reform, talks about this tactic they use, thought stopping. And so I would stop that thought and immediately, I need to just be more submissive, and I just need to be a good girl, No.
Now,
no.
I know each call has a different approach. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses are more of a Gnostic kind of knowledge-based cult. They do want to answer a whole lot of different questions as long as they're not questions about themselves. The Mormon Church is more about a feeling. It's like you have to convert yourself by convincing yourself that Joseph Smith is the prophet and the Book of Mormon is the truth. It's like a prayer of convincing yourself.
Right.
Now, you did say something that's interesting. You said that your worship meetings, like in the 2x2s, are only an hour long. So,
right.
In an hour, what you sing a couple of songs and there's no real content, no real substance to your meeting.
Not really. What it'll look like typically is I'm laughing because I just had a vision of somebody did a parody video of this on YouTube and posted it on YouTube, and it's pretty funny. But my friend Lynette, I think she's listening. She'd be laughing now too. She knows what I'm talking about. So everybody walks in. It's silent, and you walk right in the front door, and find the meeting room. Usually it's in the living room, and you find your seat and you sit down, and it is silent. And then the elder of the meeting will say, let's begin our meeting. He chooses hymns ahead of time that people will sing. Or he'll ask, does anybody have a hymn they'd like us to sing to start our meeting today. And so we'll sing a hymn or two, and then it goes into prayer time, and people just take turns going around the room praying. And it might be, Lord, we're thankful for our workers, and they'll say thankful for Jesus, but to them, Jesus was just a dude who earned his place as Son of God through obedience. So,
wow. So Jesus had to earn.
Yeah,
they
refer to him. They refer to him more as their elder brother than. Wow. They'll use the term Son of God, but they don't really know what that means. Anyway, and so then they'll go around and they'll pray, but there really is more emphasis on the system and the workers than on Jesus. And so then when they're done praying, they'll sing one more hymn, and how they know prayer time is over is the elder kind of keeps track of who's prayed and who hasn't, and he knows who in the meeting will take part. You're not allowed to take part unless you have, quote unquote, professed that they are the ones in the church. And so he knows in the room who that is, and then he'll pray last, and then we'll sing another hymn, and then the meeting is open for people to stand up, and they talk for 20 seconds to a minute.
Wow.
And they'll just say, like, I've been thinking about this verse, and this is why I liked it. And then usually with something like, I want to do better in the coming days, or I want to be more willing. And then they'll sit down, and again, the elder knows who is worthy of sharing their testimony, and then he'll speak last. And he usually speaks a little bit longer, and maybe we'll have something of more substance. And then they'll have a hymn about the communion, the bread and the wine, and they'll pass that around. And again, the elder knows who is worthy to partake of it, who is not. And so if he has to make sure, if there's any question, if say there's a visitor that day that he doesn't know, maybe it's a relative that he's never met, of somebody else in the meeting he's never met and he doesn't really know, he might hop up and.
Wow. So, I mean, do they have their own hymnal their own hymns that they've written, or? Wow, yeah.
Yes, they do. And that's another interesting historical tidbit is they like to leave the impression that they have written all the hymns in their book. And this is a very distinct memory I have when I first started with this boy that I was dating in high school. And I was asking him all kinds of questions, and I saw his hymn book sitting on his table, so I picked it up and started flipping through it. And I recognized some of the hymns from, or at least one, from from our hymnal at the church I went to. And I said, I know this hymn. And he goes, oh, no, you wouldn't know that hymn. That was written by one of our workers. You wouldn't know that. Well, it wasn't. I think it was a Franny Cosby hymn. But see, they leave out of they don't put who the writer was. They don't do that. And so they like to give that impression. And they also change. They have, when I survey the wondrous cross, on whom the Prince of Glory died, that hymn, there's that line in there that says, Christ my God. They've changed the lyrics to Christ my Lord. So
wow.
There's a few.
So what do they believe about Jesus? They believe he was just a man?
Yes. Now there are a few who, back in the, when was it? Early 90s, where I lived, there was a big brouhaha because one of the workers here was preaching about the deity of Christ. And he got kicked out of the work. He got disfellowshipped for a while. And he had a following who also believed in the deity of Christ. And there wasn't a fracture in the church. Nobody really left the church over it. But there was a lot of drama at the time, and those people that believe that, and they still believe in the deity of Christ, they believe first it is more important to believe that this is the true church and the ministry is the true ministry, because they've stayed in this church. So they're putting
that happens a lot.
and the workers over who Jesus is. So even though they believe they believe in the Trinity,
Mm.
they still don't, that's not an essential doctrine for them. The essentials are that this is the one true church started by Jesus on the shore of Galilee, which is a lie, and we have the one true ministry, and you cannot be saved unless you hear their gospel preached by one of their workers.
Wow.
So when I joined,
Yes.
even though I had been baptized in a Christian church,
Mm.
and I had already become a Christian, even though I was pretty ignorant, I had to reprofess my faith in this system and be baptized again because my first baptism wasn't legitimate.
Wow. Yeah, well, yeah, that they would do the same thing in any of the other cults.
Yeah.
If you're baptized outside of the cult, then it's not legitimate.
Correct.
So,
yeah,
that's interesting. So, what was that well-shed moment where, what was it that one thing was it the deity of Christ that impacted you to
yes.
actually where you submitted to Jesus and what got you to that point where you gave your life to Christ instead of a cult?
There's so much. There's the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
straw I was going through. I was sifting through a lot of it, and the deity of Christ is the main is the big thing for me.
Right.
Even though I learned who Jesus was, and I learned the truth about the history of the group, and because of my husband, I thought, okay, you know what, I can bear this. I can do this. I can just go along to get along, and I can do this just to keep peace and to save my marriage and to keep peace in my home. Well, then one Sunday morning, I felt like God was really saying, no, you can't, because you'd be saying something about me that isn't true. And that moment came in a Sunday morning meeting. I'm sitting there, and this woman got up and started to say why we can't worship Jesus over God because he's just a man, and we can't give him too much worship. We want to respect him and honor him, but we've got to be careful that we don't place him over God. And that's when I said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. I can't do it.
I know that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and so that's why I think, I really, when you, so like the people that stay in the cult that know, that quote unquote believe in the Trinity, if they really knew who Jesus is and encountered his righteousness,
yes,
they wouldn't be able to stomach staying in the 2x2. And that's where it got to me. I was revolting. The idea to diminish Jesus like that was revolting to me. And I could not take it anymore. I just couldn't take it.
I know that feeling. I did the same thing. You know, my wife was a believing witness, and I was going to the Kingdom Hall with her. And I made an agreement. I was like, okay, I just won't go that often. And I actually I was actually going out in field service with her too, but I just wasn't placing any literature. I was just using my Bible. But that came to an end abruptly because, of course, I was actually not placing literature, and I wasn't behaving as a good Jehovah's Witness, and so that ended that. But I was still going to the meetings, and it just became so unpalatable for me. Eventually, my meeting attendance when my wife reduced. I was going twice a month, and then I just couldn't even do twice a month. I was going once a month, and it became so unbearable that I said, "That's it. I just can't go to another meeting." What I'm hearing there just makes me it was horrible for me. So,
right.
yeah, it becomes absolutely, you can't stomach it anymore. You can't stomach the hypocrisy. You can't stomach the false teaching, and it just becomes absolutely utter rejection.
Right.
But yeah, so I understand that completely. And it was, so I guess I mean, it was years working on you, and the Lord worked on you eventually, and through your kids, and that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And through a little Christian school. So is that the church that you attend? The church that has a Christian school that your kids were going to?
No, it's not. It's not.
It's another church you attend now?
Yeah. And actually, the AP bio teacher at Grace, the school where my kids go, was the youth pastor at the church that I now attend. There's a lot of connection there. And actually, and one of the pastors of the church I attend, his wife was the kindergarten teacher at that school for 25 years, 30 years. Yeah, so there's a lot of connections there. It just so happened. I feel like it was the sovereignty of God just planning all this out. When my son was in 6th grade, he was good friends with this little boy, Davey, and Davey said, you should come to youth group, because the 2x2s don't have anything like that. They just have their meetings. Anything outside of that structure, because they don't want to look like a worldly church. They don't want to do anything that would be at all similar to a worldly church. So, yeah, I think it was 7th grade, we finally started letting him go. And I feel like God was just planting the seed of that relationship that I would have. And so I made an appointment with the youth pastor. I wanted him to know, and I think Ryan was in 9th grade by this time. I wanted him to know, the youth pastor, what the history was here, what Ryan had been raised in, and what it was all about. And I hadn't left yet, but I had a period of, I think it was 6 months to a year, where I had left emotionally and mentally. I'd left the cult, but I was still going along to get along, meeting with the youth pastor behind my husband's back. Anyway, and so it just seemed like a natural place to go when I finally left the cult, because my kids were already plugged in there with the youth group and knew kids there. And I knew some of the adults there just because of the connection with the Christian school. But no, my church is not the church that's affiliated with the Christian school. It's a ministry of a different church.
So that's great. That, you know what, I'll tell you, that is divine providence, because this would have been really, really difficult for your kids if it wasn't for the fact that they had connections with other Christian children. And so it's just that's great. That's amazing. And you have the daughter's the one that's serving as a Christian missionary, right?
Right. She's a junior in college, and she's studying. Her major is in intercultural ministry and psychology, and then she wants to become a Christian counselor.
Wow.
And she's the one that, she's been on multiple missions trips. And then I have a daughter.
The children are boys, right?
No, my oldest is a boy, and he's on the home.
Okay. So you have 2 daughters and one son. Hello?
Hear me?
Yeah, you have two daughters
Okay.
and one boy?
Yes. So I have one left in the nest, and she's a sophomore in high school.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's great. So that's amazing. I mean, I tell you, we definitely need to pray for your husband, and I know your children serve as a fantastic witness. I think that one of the things is that, and what you described about your worship meetings is just so really devoid of any real biblical teaching. Did you even bring your Bibles to your worship meetings?
Oh yes, they would, because they would refer to verses.
Okay.
So yeah, and they use mostly. And I just lost it. About their studying the Bible. Yeah, they don't.
Do they have their own publications? Do they have any books or anything?
No, they don't. They don't, and that's what makes it kind of frustrating because, with Mormonism, it's awesome. They document everything. They have so many, with their scriptures and their Pearl of Great Price and Doctrine and Covenants, and they record everything any of their prophets have ever said. You can use that against them when you're evangelizing to them.
Right.
And Jehovah's Witnesses, you have the Watchtower, those publications. And but with the 2x2s, they frown on, some people take notes, but they frown on them being shared. They are very secretive about, they don't save any of their meetings, any recordings of any of their meetings. People can call in and listen if they're sick.
Right.
They can call in and listen over a phone line, but they don't save anything, and they're very secretive about what they do publish, like address lists. They have lists that they publish of where conventions are all over the world and the dates, and contact information for the workers. But they're very careful to keep that inside the group and not share it. So you can't, I have brought things up to my husband when I was in that before I left meeting, before I left the 2x2s, and I would try to have conversations with my husband about things I'd heard. I would say, well, the worker said this in meeting, but this is what the Bible says. And he would say, no, I didn't hear that. He didn't say that. Well, I didn't have a way to prove. If he did say it and prove that it was unscriptural.
There's plausible deniability because there's nothing documented.
So it makes it really frustrating. Yeah.
That's hard. That's tough.
And they believe that you could be attending the same meeting and two people hear two totally different things.
Right. Yeah, they get. As I said, there's always plausible deniability if anything's not documented. It could be simply you just heard them wrong or anything.
Exactly.
That can always be used. I just want to let everybody know we're down to the last 10 minutes of the program, and so if you have anything to share or comment or question, just press 1. The number is 347-934-0379. I did see someone they had pressed 1, and then they got off for a minute. And so if you wanted to go ahead and share a comment or question, go ahead and you can press 1 now. And we have only 10 minutes left. So, that's why I was thinking that's got to be really difficult. But I guess with him being an elder, he does have a grasp of what they do teach, and you could always use the Bible, as far as, I guess, those foundational things. I think they're right, with those two things as far as salvation by their works as opposed to grace or the deity of Christ. They use Bible like, any ordinary, maybe a King James Version.
Yes.
Or do they have their own translation? So some groups do that, like the Jehovah's Witnesses.
No.
The six. Yeah.
No, they don't have their own.
So they use the King James Version?
Mostly.
Or, yeah,
that's what my
I figured
husband uses, the King James.
I figured it'd be a KJV. So I mean, what do they do when they approach scriptures like John 1:1 or the book of Titus, which calls Jesus our God and Savior, or 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 1, which calls him our God and Savior? What do they do with scriptures like that? I know with the Jehovah's Witnesses, what they did was they manipulated and changed the scriptures.
Yeah.
So
well, they pluck
King
them out
James
of
Version
context.
is strong on the deity of Christ.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
They just pluck them out of context. Is what they do.
So I mean, who do they believe the Word is? Then is the Word not Jesus Christ? And John chapter 1, verse 1, or they believe that's something else?
They won't talk to you about it if you try to press them on it. And, well, I know I have a friend who's in the same situation I'm in, and when she had this conversation with her husband, he relented and said, okay, well, Jesus is a God.
Yeah, but
so they don't have an answer. Exactly.
Yeah.
They don't have an answer. They can't answer it. Like I said, they are ill to defend their faith, which is why they don't like to have conversations with people on the street. They don't like to be. Their answer to everything is, well, just come to the meeting. So the workers will have typically 2 meetings a week that are open to outsiders. The gospel meetings on Sunday afternoon and some midweek evening meeting.
Yeah. And the A God thing, it really fails Unitarians, whether it's Jehovah's Witnesses or some other group, because then you have to admit that or actually acknowledge that the Bible's not monotheistic, and that God has other gods like the Greeks did. You know, Zeus is the big god, and then you have Mercury and, you know, all Mars, the god of war, and so it just winds up really changing the whole dynamic of what the Bible teaches as there being, you know, one God, and only He alone you should worship, and now you can, you know, worship other small gods.
Exactly.
But I just we're running out of time right now. I just want to throw out at anybody 347-934-0379. I do want to thank you, Kylee, for coming on our program, and it's great courage to come on, and I know that that it's hard living in a divided household, and what makes it better is, of course, that your kids, you can talk to your children, and that's great, and you said somebody else is in your same predicament.
I have a friend.
Somebody else. Yeah, so that's someone that also you guys can feedback off of each other and work together on both of your spouses.
It does help with the loneliness.
Yeah, but and then you have your church, which is great. You know what? When I was, of course, when I was in a divided household, I know how difficult it was. I lived far away from the church ending where my godfather was attending that church, and I remember I'd drive to church and cry all the way to church, wipe my tears before I go in, and then cry all the way back home after church. You know. Yep. And
I can relate.
But but God is good, and He has surrounded you with a great cloud of witnesses, and some within your own household. That's a blessing that your children have, you know, they've been able to see Jesus for who He is. Yes. And I think the greatest gift that any parent can have is to see that their children come to Christ.
Yeah, and they were a huge help through all of this. And yeah, I remember before I left, when I was trying to engage my husband and have conversations with him, he would just get angry and put up a wall. My son, who is a young man of very few words, he doesn't say a lot, but he would just come into the room. He'd hear us, and he would just come into the room and sit down by me and just sit there, and that meant the world to me.
It's awesome, and that book is not written yet on your husband, and I think that in areas where you possibly can't reach him, your children will be able to. Because
I hope so. It's hard though, isn't it? It's hard not to get cynical. Yeah. It really is, but I know God is able.
Yes.
And I just pray that He will. You know?
Yeah. And you know, just like me, I still pray for my mom. You know, I've been talking to her years. Not of no fault of mine, because I have reached out to my mother on many occasions, and it's just it's been a really laborious task. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Just to even
I'm sorry.
trying to engage in conversation. It's been like talking to a corpse. But, we pray for them. We know that we live on the promise that Jesus, in John chapter 6, had made to the Father. The Father said, that he's given all of these people to Jesus, and Jesus said that he will not lose a single one on the last day. And so all that the Father has given him has entrusted to Christ, he will deliver 100%. And we just pray that they are part of that 100%. And if so, we know that somewhere along the line, that 100% will be coming home, and hopefully they're in there. So that's a great hope to know that God delivers totally on what he promises, and Jesus is going to, as our great shepherd, will deliver. He will not lose a single sheep. For those of you that are listening, we just want to let you know that next week at 1 o'clock is going to be a retelecast program with Keith Walker from Evidence Ministries. And I do want to congratulate my brother William Albrecht, who has been a frequent person who debates on this program, and on his newborn baby girl that was born last night, Olivia Albrecht. And so congratulations to the Albrecht family. He's going to be a great dad. His wife is going to be a great mom. We just pray for them. And thank you for listening to Kylee. Thank you, Kylee, for coming and sharing.
Thank you for having me.
So much that you shared is just so much in common with a couple of groups. That's just
they all have something in common, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yes, it's amazing. So please pray for those in the cults. Please pray for the Jehovah's Witnesses. Pray for those in the 2x2, the Church of the Friends and Workers, and pray for the Hickok family. And without further ado, I thank you. God bless you. And if you want to hear more about the cults, go on sixscreensofthewatchtower.com. And at 5:30, I think, Rick Farron has his programs, which begin, and you can dial in at 712-432-8710 at 5:30, 712-432-8710. You'll be prompted to dial 9925 to be a caller in queue. So go ahead and listen to the Six Screens program. It starts at 5:30, and you'll hear news and views about Jehovah's Witnesses and testimonies and so much all night long. Rick burns the midnight out, midnight oil. So that starts at 5:30 this evening. You all have a blessed weekend. Thank you again. Bye-bye.